pull your chair a little closer. I want to tell you about a bet, a foolish, reckless, magnificent bet, made one autumn evening at a banker's table where the wine was good and the arguments were better. It was the kind of dinner party where clever men get a little too clever. Someone raised the question of capital punishment, whether it was more humane than life imprisonment. The banker, a big, confident man, said death was kinder. A young lawyer, barely 25, barely finished with his studies, pushed back. He said he'd rather live any life than face no life at all. Well, the banker laughed and leaned forward. 2,000,000 rubles, he said, if you can sit alone, truly alone, for 15 years. No visitors, no newspapers, no freedom whatsoever. The young man looked him straight in the eye and said yes, just like that. Yes. The guests went quiet. Someone set down a glass. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees, and nobody laughed anymore. They built him a little lodge in the banker's garden. Small, sturdy, quiet as a held breath. The lawyer moved in, and the world moved on without him. He was allowed books, a musical instrument, wine if he wished, paper and pen. He could write letters but receive none. Any attempt to cross the threshold, even to stand in the doorway and breathe the outside air, and the bet was forfeit. Guards kept watch through a small window, and so the years began. The first year, I imagine, was the hardest. You could hear it in his early requests. Light novels, comedies, stories with happy endings. He played the piano at all hours, restless and searching, like a man pacing a room inside a room. He drank wine heavily that first winter, then stopped altogether. He read and slept and stared at walls. But here is the thing about a man left alone, with only his mind for company. Eventually, the mind begins its real work. Eventually, something deeper wakes up. By the second year, the music stopped, and the books changed. He asked for classics, history, philosophy, the ancient Greeks, then science, then languages, so he could read in 6 tongues before the decade was out, then theology, then everything. The banker would watch the light burning in that little window late into the night, and perhaps he felt something he could not quite name. Wonder, maybe, or the first faint shadow of unease. Because the young man in the lodge was not suffering the way you might expect. He was not withering. He was growing. Year after year, book after book. He was becoming something the banker could not quite recognize. Something quieter and larger and harder to dismiss. The guards reported that he sometimes wept while reading, sometimes laughed alone, sometimes sat utterly still for hours, staring at nothing, as if listening to a conversation nobody else could hear. 15 years is a long time to be alone, but it is also a long time to think. And some men, given enough silence, begin to hear the truth. Now, while the lawyer was finding his way inward, the banker was losing his way entirely. 15 years is a long time in business too, and not all of it kind. Speculation, bad investments, the market's cold indifference. By the time the deadline drew near, the banker who had once tossed 2,000,000 rubles onto a wager, like a man tossing bread to birds, that man was nearly broken. 2,000,000 rubles would ruin him now. It would be the end of everything. And so his mind, desperate and cornered, began to work in the darkest of directions. He told himself the lawyer had only wasted his youth. He told himself the knowledge gained in a cage was worth nothing in the living world. He told himself many things, but underneath all of it was something simpler and uglier. He could not pay, and he could not bear to be seen as a man who could not pay. The night before the deadline, he made a decision. A terrible, small, cowardly decision. He would go to the lodge. It was after midnight when he crossed the garden. The November cold was sharp and still. No moon to speak of. His hands were trembling, not from the cold, I think, but from what he intended. He had a plan, a pillow, a quiet crime that the world would call a natural death. He peered through the little window first, and what he saw made him stop. The lawyer was sitting at a table, hunched and thin as winter branches, surrounded by towers of open books. His hair had gone gray. His face was lined and hollow. He looked like a man who had already left the world once and was only passing through it again on his way to somewhere else. And then the banker noticed the letter. A single sheet of paper on the table, covered in handwriting. He eased open the door, crept inside, and with trembling hands, those terrible, guilty hands, he picked it up and began to read. Listen now. This is the heart of it. The letter said, and I want you to feel every word. It said, "Tomorrow at noon I am to receive 2,000,000 rubles, but I will not take them. I have read your philosophers, your poets, your holy men. I have lived inside your music and your science, and I tell you, your world is a lie. You are proud of your wisdom, but the wisest of creatures, the whale, has lived 10,000 years and learned nothing. You have cities and palaces, and I have seen them all from the inside of these books, and I do not want them. You call yourselves free, walking about under your sky, but your freedom is a cage you have simply grown comfortable in. I have had 15 years of solitude, and I have become something you cannot touch. I despise your money. I despise the freedom you would hand me. I will leave 5 minutes before the hour, so that I may forfeit every single ruble, and in doing so, prove to myself and to you that I am already free." The banker read it twice, then set it down very slowly, and stood there in the dark at 5 minutes to noon. The lawyer stepped out of the lodge. He was thin, gray, older than his years, but he walked with the particular steadiness of a man who has settled something deep within himself. He did not look at the house. He did not look for the banker. He simply walked down the garden path, through the gate, and away into the morning. Gone. The banker stood at the window and watched him go. He went to the lodge afterward. I don't know why. Perhaps to be sure it was real. And he found the book still open. The candle burned down to nothing, and the letters still on the table. He picked it up and locked it in his safe. Some say he kept it there for years, whether out of guilt or awe or something he never found a name for, I cannot tell you. What I can tell you is this: the man who walked away that morning owned nothing, and the man left standing owned everything. And yet, between the two of them, only one was free. You think about that tonight, as the fire burns low. You think about which one you'd rather be.